welcome, Cheryl. It's so nice to meet you. Thanks for agreeing to share your story and insights with our listeners.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I've always loved stories about entrepreneurs and how they launch their businesses. Eventually, here we're going to nerd out on some science stuff. But first, I'd love to hear about your background and how Tiny Health first got started.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, am I a medical doctor or am I a scientist? And I'm neither of those things. I went to school for engineering and I had started a company back in '09 that I sold to Walmart Labs in 2013. So I have experience running companies. So in between this company and that company, I was sort of like, searching for my next thing. What am I going to build next that would be meaningful? And then I had two kids. So I had my daughter about nearly 6 years ago, my son nearly 4 years ago. And I would say Tiny Health is pretty much inspired by my two very different births. I had a C-section with my daughter 6 years ago and a vaginal home birth with my son 4 years ago. And so because both my kids were breached and like with breached kids these days, like you tend to get a C-section, unfortunately. So I was researching what that C-section would mean to my health, my baby's health, lifelong health, and really uncovered that the baby is pretty sterile in the womb during the prenatal stage, that there's not really any microbial transfer. The transfer actually happens from mom to baby at birth during labor. So when a baby passes through the vaginal canal, they first get seeded, so to speak, with the mom's vaginal microbes, and then the gut microbes through some fecal fluid exchanging during labor. So labor is actually pretty important for the whole process of colonization of the bacteria in the baby's gut. And then through breastfeeding, the bacteria from the mom's gut continue to transfer to the baby, and also through the environment and close contact with family members, and also the immediate birthing environment. So hospital versus home does make an impact and things like that. So when I learned that, I'm like, okay, great. What does this mean? Well, it means that with the C-section, I was exposed to antibiotics and hence my baby is as well. So their guts may be affected by that antibiotics during the operations. And then also they're obviously not passing through the vaginal canal. So they're missing some crucial microbes that aren't passed through the labor process. And C-section babies have a very different gut from vaginally born babies. And the science here is very solid and you can Google it yourself. They tend to have more risk of eczema, allergies, asthma, and hay fever as an adult. So this progression of allergic diseases called atopic march. And so I was kind of like, oh no, like how do I de-risk my infant from these risks? And so I was kind of doing a lot of research in this area the first 2 years of my daughter's life, because she did have eczema around 6 months and she developed some food sensitivities to sesame and then now dairy and gluten intolerance and things like that. And then when my son was born, basically a week after he was born, I started Tiny Health because I realized that because the immune system development of the child's lifelong immune system basically is kind of dependent. It's kind of developed in the first couple years of life, and it's really dependent on the bacteria that colonize them at birth. There was no gut tests in the market or stool tests that could properly measure an infant's microbiome. And so most stool tests, and I can talk about that later, is based on adult ranges and is using a different technology called PCR. And I wanted a technology that gave me more resolution to the microbes that I was looking for that I read in research papers. So kind of that's how Tiny Health was born. I was really inspired by the research I'd done and knowing that there's an opportunity to course correct any major imbalances that are found in infancy. I was worried that with my son, my second child, that I would have another C-section, and then this time I wanted to catch it in time so that I can correct it, any imbalances, and then prevent chronic conditions for him. And that's how Tiny Health was started.
Tremendous story. So many businesses, so many insights in life come about through these personal experiences. That's just fantastic. I think it'd be fascinating. We won't get into it, but if you had not had your children right then, what business might you have started? But I'm so glad you started Tiny Health, that
Thank you.
resolved that way. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of inside information on Tiny Health, but I have some limited experience, and it's just an email thread to several of your staff, and I've just found, first of all, from my observation, your staff are absolutely amazing. And several different people replied to that same email thread and just offered all of the right helpful information. But then I noticed later on that one of the responders was someone named Cheryl, and then I put two and two together, and that's you. And I'm just wondering, as such a busy CEO, how do you have time to jump on and answer support questions like that?
Yeah. So the answer to kind of how so many people are able to reply to that same email is we use this service that's a shared inbox, basically, that helps people kind of multiple people kind of take on a customer's issue and help them resolve, because we have different people doing different shifts, maybe weekends and nights and things like that too. So I'm actually still on every single email that comes into hello@tinyhealth.com, even from day one until now, because even though I am very busy and I have a lot of responsibilities, to me, customers are really important. Ultimately, why am I building this product? I'm building this product to help parents like myself and what I went through personally. And many of our parents, I would say as many as 70% of them, come to us because their babies or their kids have some sort of chronic condition. And so I want to hear about their experience. If they're running into any issues, I get alerted real time, basically. So I've mastered this way of reading many emails and kind of triaging based on subject titles and the preview, which ones I should double click into. And like, if there's a pattern, if I'm noticing an issue, like, oh, maybe USPS is having a delivery issue and everyone's getting their kids late, or the lab is kind of like there's some delay there, I can kind of like basically zoom in and kind of like get a task force to see if we can rectify the situation quicker. So for me, it's very helpful. And also getting feedback from customers on, sort of like the results. Is it helpful? What challenges are they facing? Is really helpful for me.
Sounds like you have your CEO hat and your mom hat on at the same time as you're doing that.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I just care a lot about our parents and who we're serving. If we're not doing our jobs, meeting their needs, then what are we doing?
Yeah, wonderful. And if you had 1,000 customers, or sorry, 100,000 customers right now, would you still be wanting to be that engaged? Similarly, at least triaging those.
I hope so. I mean, we'll see. I plan to be on it until I'm at breaking point. So we are at like tens and thousands of customers already. So it's like at some point this year, soon we'll hit probably 100,000, but we'll see. If you email and then you say, "Hey, Cheryl, are you there?" and I respond, then I still am on it.
Well, the fact you're going to reach possibly 100,000 this year is stunning. I didn't realize that. Wonderful. I know several things that make Tiny Health stand out is the microbiome data you have on the first 1,000 days of a child's life from conception to about age 2. Your website states that Tiny Health is the first gut health test for moms and babies 0 to 3 years. There's lots of research, as you said. You could just Google this stuff on infant gut and its relation to their future health, as you mentioned with your own children. It seems to me, in many ways, Tiny Health is becoming like a research arm because of all of that massive amount of data you've gathered. And now you're going to be reaching 100,000 customers. Would you agree that you're becoming sort of a research arm? And could you explain why this information is so vital for your customers?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. And many people don't realize that, oh, like you're just a gut testing platform. But there is an ability for us to leverage the data we're collecting to contribute back to science and add to science and be a research arm, as you mentioned. So kind of obviously we take data privacy very seriously, and there's no PII, PHI, which is like basically your personally identifiable information. We encrypt that and we disassociate that from the data we're collecting in terms of the microbiome data and its correlation with certain disease or health state. So, in last year, we actually had launched an IRB approved study to look more into like the gut microbiome connections with allergies. So I mentioned earlier, I found a lot of evidence supporting the infant gut with eczema, allergies, asthma, and hay fever. The weakest link in that thread is food allergies, actually. And then from allergies, there's a lot more kind of like within that. There's the IgE mediated allergies and the non-IgE mediated allergies. And now there's cow's milk protein allergy issues where the infant may be sensitive to the mom's dairy intake, so through breastfeeding. So when the mom then kind of like stops dairy, then the infant isn't as reactive. So there's something with the cow's milk protein that the infant may be allergic to. So those are newer types, I would say, types of allergies that doesn't have whole lot of data. It's something that our study last year that we launched that already ended in the fall. We collected some data on that to basically see if we can identify any sort of like predictive biomarkers. And also in the future, if we have enough data, we could even work with the therapeutics company, microbial therapeutics company, to create solutions and helping these kids in the future. So in that sense, that's one area that we have research into, like infant allergies. In the future, we could launch many arms with partners researching fertility, infertility, researching autism, researching adult chronic constipation, IBD, IBS. So in that sense, yes, we have a tremendous opportunity to be a research arm as we already are.
Yeah, fantastic. With the fact that you're gathering these hundreds of thousands of data points, and you don't have typically a control group as you would in a research thing. Um, can you publish these results in that regard, or are they publishable in a slightly different way?
Yeah, so the whether or not we can publish something in, say, a scientific journal, it depends if we have IRB approval. IRB stands for, I believe it's institutional review board. So basically it's a kind of like a institutional arm. I'm not sure if it's a government operated or independent, but it is an IRB process to get, they will look into your design study and make sure everything is ethical and according to standards. So you have to get a study approved through the IRB to be able to publish. So that study I mentioned for looking into food allergies is IRB approved. We currently have 2 more internal IRB research projects ongoing that we intend to publish results. But right now, as it is, like, the data we're collecting at Tiny Health is not publishable unless we explicitly, serve you up a consent form and tell you and ask for your consent to want to include your data set in research that we can publish. We may do that in the future. This year is kind of, something that we have on our roadmap to do. Then there's so much more data that we can investigate and find answers to a lot of common problems, especially in the pediatric space, where in clinical research, there's very little funding, unfortunately, to this group because it's harder to get approvals for the maternal pregnancy prenatal arm and the infant arm. So this is a space and a great opportunity for, again, Tiny Health to collect that longitudinal data between mom and baby and learn more about associations and maybe even causations, right? And then be able to publish this data.
Obviously, good research has to have those good quality standards in place, but so much valuable data there. So I for one, just hope that it's utilized as much as possible. The more I learn about the infant microbiome and how it can impact the remainder of his or her life, the more I believe that most infants, maybe not every last one, but most infants probably should be screened with a gut test such as at Tiny Health. But the problem that I understand is that most clinicians probably have no idea how to read or interpret a gut test, let alone what solutions to offer. You get a CBC and you've got low hemoglobin. Well, sort of what to do from there. How does your team of professionals come alongside parents, and can they, in any sense, replace a clinician?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you say clinicians, I'm interpreting that as a practitioner, like maybe a primary care
Correct.
provider, a doctor. But I mean, it is true that most clinicians or practitioners won't probably know how to interpret a stool test result. Maybe some of the newer functionally holistically trained physicians have learned about it. There's certainly existing tests out there in the market that are, again, based on qPCR technology called GI-map, GI-FX, doctor's data. We use a different technology called shotgun metagenomic sequencing that is more comprehensive and more, it gives you like coverage, 100% coverage on all the microbes in your gut. So it's a more extensive stool test. So that is even newer from the existing stool tests in the market. So yes, most clinicians won't know how to interpret it. And because in medical school, they don't get training on any microbiome or gut microbiome sort of education. They don't even get, most of the time, they don't even get nutrition education, right? But I do think that, in the future that this infant, especially like for infants, the gut microbiome tests will be, I hope, routine. That's certainly our vision, and we're here to make that happen because it is so critical. That first 1,000 days in the baby's life and the gut development is so crucial for the lifelong immune system and immune health. And any major dysbiosis, which means imbalances, sometimes we do see like infants with 90% E. coli type bacteria. It causes too much inflammation. It causes issues later in life. So we do think this is a crucial test. And that's why we're doing a lot of internal clinical studies that we can eventually publish to prove the sort of the importance of it. We do have a team of internal microbiome specialists to help parents interpret their microbiome reports. We have a gut baseline assessment test that is at $249, and that comes with a consult call with a microbiome specialist for about 30 minutes. If you bought just the test, you can add on a consult call for, I think, $39 right now. So it's very affordable. We really just want to make this accessible and affordable to most people to be able to understand what's in their gut and then what to do next. So, but obviously we also designed a product to be self-sufficient. So if you are well-versed enough, and certainly we have some parents who are, you can read all the next steps and action items based on your results. Is all personalized based on your specific gut. So we provide kind of recommendations from a dietary perspective. If your child's already eating solids, or if you're taking the gut test as a parent, we provide supplement recommendations down to the product level. So not everyone needs a pre or probiotic, but if you do need one, we have specific product recommendations that our science team have rigorously validated in terms of, everything has to be evidence-backed and has clinical proof before we recommend it to our users. And then thirdly, from a lifestyle perspective, so are you using too much antibacterial soap? Can you swap out your cleaners? Are you getting enough nature? A lot of more lifestyle changes that we can recommend based on your results.
Yeah, great. So, you mentioned the moms, and moms of sick children are very vigilant. Most of them, they become their own researchers, and they're so engaged. So I can see a lot of them wouldn't need it, but I appreciate. I don't know if you're not necessarily calling it the telehealth, that consult, but that seems very, very valuable.
Yeah, with telehealth. And I should also mention that, in terms of like, what are we doing with clinicians and practitioners, right? We do have a practitioner arm led by our medical director to train practitioners how to interpret these reports. So we do have like hundreds of practitioners already onboarded and trained on our reports. So that's part of the plan as well.
While I was perusing your website, I did see a tab that I thought perhaps that's what that is in regard to, the training the clinician. So that thank you for explaining that.
Yes.
Wonderful. With all of that research and background, has Tiny Health determined an ideal age for an infant to be tested?
Well, the ideal age depends from my science perspective, as early as possible, the earliest being the 7th day post-birth, would give us the most data on what seeded the infant at birth, what microbes may have transferred from mom's vaginal microbiome and gut microbiome at birth, which really informs us on what the infant was colonized with at birth. Gives us a lot of clues to kind of changes later in life. The three 6-month time point is interesting because then you see the effects of the breast milk or formula. So if the infant didn't have those microbes seeded from birth, maybe through a C-section or antibiotic exposure, then by 3 months, you can see if the mom had the right microbes in her gut to transfer to baby. Because then if the mom had some imbalances herself and she's breastfeeding, she may not be transferring some certain microbes that are key to the infant as well. So sometimes when we see that at 3 months, the baby has still a lot of unfriendly bacteria, we do recommend the mom get her gut checked as well, so she can also rebalance or improve her gut while breastfeeding, so the benefits transfer to the infant. And then the 6-month time point, 9-month time point is also a huge shift when the infant starts eating solids. Then more diversity comes in through foods, and it's important, a very crucial developmental time point for the infant. That's another good age to test to see how are you getting enough diversity in time, because if you don't get enough diversity, that could also contribute to allergies or asthma. And then the 1-year time point is an important predictive biomarker for asthma at age 6. And this is all like very scientifically backed. There's a lot of papers showing that. So there's definitely different time points, and a 2-year, 3-year time point is when you want to continue testing, or, I would say twice a year would be a good sort of proactive check in past the 1-year stage. Like in the first year, I would recommend 4 times, at the very least, depending on your, sort of like affordability. But past the 2-year age, 2-3 times, and then the infant gut or the baby gut stops maturing at a very drastic phase between 3 to 5 years. It kind of finally matures into an adult-like microbiome. So if we take a child who's 5 years old and test their microbiome, it looks, and then you take one of their parents, sometimes we see it being pretty identical because you're living in the same environment, eating the same foods and all that. And so it's really interesting. And sometimes when we see family microbiomes differing, they may be eating different kinds of lunches at school or at work, and then maybe not eating the same foods or being in the same environment as much as those who do. But yeah, I hope this answers your question. It's kind of a factor of affordability. I mean, we think in the first 3 years, testing closely more frequently is beneficial to make sure your child's microbiome is developing on track. And then beyond 3 years, past the maturation phase, twice a year is a good idea for 3 years and above.
Since I've become sort of a gut nerd, I have helped several family and friends do testing, almost all so far 16S, until I stumbled, thankfully, upon Tiny Health. But one of them was a 3-week-old infant. And I wondered after the fact, oh, is that too early? Because I wasn't that familiar. So that's helpful to know that 1 week is a good baseline for that.
Baseline, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right. I had sought out Tiny Health for a different infant whose parents and clinician needed to know the subspecies of a certain bacteria. And I know that your method of testing, which you already mentioned, was shotgun metagenomics. We'll get into that a little bit. Would be able to detect down to the subspecies. Could you please explain, help us understand the difference between shotgun metagenomics and the typical 16S gut tests?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. So I mentioned qPCR before. We'll come back to that. That's the typical doctor's stool test that you get from the doctor's office. So there's another kind of technology called 16S that was kind of pioneered by an older gut testing company called Ubiome. And at the time, maybe about 5-6 years ago, this was a groundbreaking technology compared to qPCR because it could basically sequence your entire gut microbiome, and it shows you all the species down to the, like, basically 100%, and we show you the relative abundance of the different species. The limitations of 16S is that, they can only do bacteria, so you can't do fungi or candida or yeast. Basically, they're all just interchangeable names. You can't do parasites, you can't do viruses and, archaea, just things like that. So it's limited to bacteria. And also the 16S is a way of amplifying a region of the DNA of the microbe, basically, and kind of like when you amplify that region, you're then matching it with a genomic sequence of the microbes. And that's how you kind of call what bacteria is the sequence. So because it's amplified, there is a higher possibility of false positives in a 16S test compared to a shotgun metagenomic sequencing. So then you kind of zoom out. Now we have shotgun, which is in a way a newer technology compared to 16S. It's typically more expensive right now, but costs are coming down very rapidly. With a 16S test, you may get results back in 2 weeks. With a shotgun sequencing test, usually it costs twice as much and it takes twice as long. So industry standard for shotgun, it's like 4 to 6 weeks, but we've optimized that at Tiny Health to 2 to 3 weeks. So pretty quick considering industry standards. And what shotgun can do is measure all microbes. So we can see bacteria, viruses, fungi, or yeast, parasites, and everything in your gut, except worms. We don't do worms because you do need to have a piece of the worm to be able to get the DNA of the worm. So we don't do that. But we also additionally can show you not just who's there, what bacteria, what viruses, or what parasites are there, but what they're doing. So what we call the functional genes of your stool or your gut microbiome, we're able to see through shotgun. So it is considered the gold standard in microbiome research today, which is why when I read those papers earlier, before I knew anything about the microbiome 6 years ago, I knew that I wanted to use shotgun sequencing. I wanted the functional genes aspect of it. And I also wanted the subspecies and strain level, because when I was researching what microbe was important for babies' digestion of breast milk, the human milk oligosaccharides, the HMOs, make up 1/3 of breast milk. And babies or humans can't really digest breast milk, sorry, the HMOs in breast milk. But a bacteria in an infant's gut called Bifidobacteria longum subspecies infantis, so the infantis strain, is the most efficient microbe to digest the HMOs in breast milk. And when babies have that specific strain, their immune system is better. They're able to digest breast milk and kind of glean the energy, all the energy from breast milk, to utilize it better. And it's very protective of the infant gut. So I really wanted to use a stool test that can measure that, and there wasn't any that could. This is why I created Tiny Health, because I wanted to specifically find B. infantis. And also, if I had B. infantis, then I could pass it on to my baby. And I learned through sequencing my own gut that I did not have B. infantis. Is one of those microbes that are, in a way, a missing microbe in our society and our humankind because of antibiotic overuse. Bifidobacteria is very sensitive to antibiotics, and even through diet and eating antibiotic-laden meat and vegetables, like pesticide vegetables and all that. So anyway, that's why shotgun sequencing is superior for the gut microbiome. It is measuring the DNA of the microbes. It's very stable. It doesn't change day to day and based on what you eat, compared to RNA, which is another technology that is very sensitive to changes in your gut. DNA sequencing using shotgun is very stable.
Yeah, thank you for that. In a prior conversation, you had used, I think it was like a camera lens analogy to define the difference between the test. Can you help us
Oh, yeah.
use that one again for us?
Yes. One way I describe the differences in the technology is like, imagine you have a family gathering with like 20 relatives and immediate family members, and you're taking a picture, right? So 16S will give you a blurry picture of all the 20 members of your family. So this may be Uncle Bob, or actually Uncle Andy, and you may confuse if it's Bob or Andy, and this may be Aunt May or Aunt Jenny, and you're not quite sure. So that's kind of how a 16S picture will tell you there's 20 members, and this is an uncle, and this is an aunt, and this is my family, but you kind of don't know. You may mix the uncles up and the aunts up. In the shotgun sequencing picture, it's a high resolution DSLR camera that gives you exactly who those people are. And not only that, you can see, it's so clear that you can see the facial expressions. So Uncle Bob is smiling and Uncle Andy is frowning. So this is the functional gene aspect of it. So like what the microbes are doing, what the what your family members are doing. Are they like happy? Are they not happy? Are they expressing themselves or not? Things that you can't do with 16S.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that. The infant mentioned before from a case study had their bifidobacteria rise, and you already established for us that that is a key bacteria for infant guts, rise from 12%, which is very low, to 81% by supplementing with a specific bifido probiotic. His healthy bacteria was wiped out from antibiotics at birth, similar to your first child. And then I learned of a similar case study where an infant went from almost undetectable bifido levels, which is obviously even worse, also due to being given antibiotics at birth, to 63% with the exact same probiotic, a very specific strain of bifidobacteria. And in both cases, thankfully, the large amounts of bifido also reduce the inflammatory bacteria and potential pathogens. Under what conditions does your team recommend that an infant supplement with bifido? Because you said not everybody needs probiotics, not everybody needs prebiotics. And do you recommend any certain strains? I saw on your website you've got BB536. You've also got EVC001 from Avivo.
Yeah, yeah. The topic of whether or not an infant or a child, even an adult, needs pre or probiotic supplementation really lies in, well, during the test, right? Like, and we get a lot of questions of what is the danger in just giving someone, an infant, a probiotic. And the thing is, like, in infancy, because your immune system is being developed and trained by these microbes who are there or not there, we as much as we can, if we don't need to, don't intervene and let nature take its course, right? So we think, scientists at Tiny Health think that there may be a danger of over supplementing, or maybe supplementing with the strains that your baby doesn't need. So if your baby already has, you mentioned this infant went from 12% to 81%. If your infant, without any probiotic intervention, already has 81% of the right kind of bifidobacteria that can digest HMOs in breast milk, as I mentioned earlier, then leave it alone. Don't touch it, because if you are supplementing with the same strain, for example, for 1 month, 6 months, especially when a baby is starting solids, you may be inhibiting the natural diversification that a baby gets through playing in nature, like dirt, and eating a variety of solids. So, I think that's the potential danger, is that their diversity is kept low for too long when they're supposed to diversify, right? And then, I think the other question is kind of under what condition do we recommend an infant supplement? So we have these reference ranges that are made for infants at different stages. So a 6 months and under baby who technically shouldn't have been exposed to solids. Well, some do get exposed to allergens at 4 months, but by and large, their gut is pretty immature and low in diversity, which we want in the first 6 months. So like the reference range for bifidobacteria at that stage in the first 6 months is different from someone between, let's just say, 6 to 12 months when they've started solids, right? And then 12 to 18 months is a different threshold. So our reference ranges actually changes according to the baby's age. So it's really important when you do our tests and we activate the kit to put in the correct birth date, because it does matter. And when we detect bifidobacteria, which is the key bacteria in an infant's gut, being too low at that specific time point, then we may recommend a bifidobacteria probiotic. And the main reason is because if the infant's gut isn't colonized by bifidobacteria, they should have between 50 to maybe 90% of bifidobacteria in the first year. Then what inhabits the infant's gut is opportunistic pathogens like E. coli type bacteria. I mentioned E. coli only because most people recognize it as an unfriendly bacteria, potentially pathogenic. Not all E. coli are bad. Some are neutral, and some may even be slightly beneficial, producing food for other microbes. But, most E. coli are not great to have in large quantities for an infant, right? Causes too much inflammation. There are other cousins to E. coli like Klebsiella, and then there's the other salmonella type bugs that could inhabit Streptococcus, Staphylococcus. that could cause, sort of like more that are associated with allergies. So when there's no bifidobacteria in the infant's gut, it gives room. It's kind of like a theater, right? With like, say, 100 seats. So if bifidobacteria aren't sitting on those theater seats, then the kind of unfriendly bacteria can come in and kind of take hold, right? So you want, in those cases, you'd want a good bifidobacteria, an evidence-based good bifidobacteria strain that's clinically backed to crowd out the unfriendly pathogens and take hold and take seat in the theater. So it keeps the unfriendly bacteria at bay to train the immune system. Now, we don't want to get rid of all E. coli. Technically, in an infant, and this is where it differs from an adult, between 1 to 5 or 10% of E. coli in the first year is pretty healthy, because you need some unfriendly bacteria to train a baby's immune system. So sometimes when a baby has 0 E. coli, we also flag it in our reports and say, you need to get your baby out in dirt more, or nature more, or expose them to more allergens, because they're too clean, over sanitized. That you need some unfriendly, but the bifidobacteria's job is to keep it at bay, like keep it at 10%.
Dirt and pets are
Yeah.
important for
Pets.
those. Right,
And
right.
the reason why pets, there's a lot of evidence showing that a household that has a dog or a cat, their infants are less likely to develop food allergies, because they're going out and bringing in some nature and bacteria from the outside, outdoors, indoors, right? And we, as a society, we used to spend so much time, maybe 90% of our time, outdoors and farms and all that. And now it's the reverse. We spend 90% indoors and not enough outdoors. So pets help you bring that element inside.
I read a study comparing Mennonites to non-Mennonites, and Mennonites are working with animals, almost all of them, and the difference was so dramatic. 3 or 4 times better guts, as a result. Yeah, and you mentioned crowding. I love that analogy of the theater. The 2 of these infants both had high Bacteroides fragilis, and like in the 40 to 60% range. And but
Wow.
also with E. coli, you mentioned some B. fragilis is good, but it's just too much. It's just too much. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. I see on your website you have a baby gut test, a child gut test, an adult gut test, and a pregnancy gut test. I was wondering, are they all the same test fundamentally, just with different normal ranges?
Yeah, so in terms of the collection method, the tube or the swab that you get, it's all the same mechanism, right? It's like a cotton swab, so to speak, but the difference in the swab is that it has a drying desiccant on the swab that kind of, when you would take a little bit stool sample from the diaper or soiled toilet paper, the desiccant dries the stool and preserves the DNA and the microbes. And when you click the cap on the tube, it's supposed to keep the oxygen out, so that it doesn't the microbes on the swab doesn't continue to grow. And that's how we preserve the sample for up to like 2 months as it gets to the lab and it's really stable in a lot of different weather environments. So that's all the same for any person. But when you do activate your kit on our website, on account.tinyhealth.com, you do have to answer a set of surveys, because we need to know, again, your age and maybe gender and things like that, health status. We do then personalize the report based on your age and what you're trying to achieve. Like if you're pregnant, again, the reference range for a pregnant person in the first trimester changes through the second and the third trimester, and there are different predictive biomarkers for that demographic. And then in the future, we're developing more biomarkers for older kids, right? The child age between 3 to 18 is a different threshold, and then adults as well. So, and then of course we have a vaginal test as well, which we need to know if it's a vaginal test to give you different metrics that we run for that cohort.
That's interesting. Thank you for explaining how it's preserved through a desiccant. My past experience have been with 16S tests, and they've all used a liquid preservative. So I was wondering how that's preserved. So That's helpful information as
Yeah,
well,
and
I
we
think,
did
for your
specifically,
customers.
I didn't want to use a liquid because, when you're dealing with collecting samples from babies, you don't want that liquid to accidentally spill on a baby. It's not great for them. So we sought out the dry swab, and there's actually two papers showing the dry swab is more stable than the liquid preservation method.
So using research again in your company, I love it. A newborn, as we're saying, gets most of his or her immunity from their mother. So how can a pregnancy gut test help mom and her baby?
Yeah, and this is kind of what I discovered through my second child, actually. So I remember I mentioned I had a C-section with my first and a vaginal birth with my son. And I thought, oh, you'd think that, okay, like my son probably got my microbes through the vaginal labor, and I'm passing all the microbes to my baby. But then I realized, because I tested my gut and vaginal microbiome during pregnancy, I didn't have those microbes that I was supposed to pass on. My gut has dysbiosis and imbalances as well. So testing earlier in pregnancy, in fact, we would highly recommend, if you're trying to conceive in the future, testing before conception is highly, highly recommended, because it takes a much longer time for the adult gut to change and to get back in balance. It took me personally 6 to 9 months of disciplined hard work in adding a prebiotic to my diet because I was missing bifidobacteria. So I need the prebiotics, the HMOs, to feed the probiotics, the bifidobacteria that I want colonized in my gut. So I had zero, and through hard work, in 6 to 9 months, it became 10%. And when I stopped probiotics and prebiotics, it's sustained at 10% for hopefully until now. And I sustain it through diet as well. So continue to eat a very high fiber diet, a very balanced diet helped me. But basically, coming back to your question, as early as possible to identify if you have the right microbes to even pass on to your baby. And then vaginal microbiome is also really important. Your baby's passing through that as well. You want it to be lactobacillus dominated. We believe there's a symbiotic relationship between lactobacillus species and bifidobacteria that should be dominating the baby's gut. So lacto is there to first seed the baby's gut, to line it, to make it easier for the gut microbes of the mom, the bifidobacteria, to stick and colonize. So if the mom's vaginal microbiome is not lactobacillus dominant, we need to course correct that, because that vaginal type is highly associated with preterm labor and other vaginal conditions. So you want your vaginal microbiome to be 99% lactobacillus dominated.
And is it GBS? Am I have the right
Yeah,
acronym there?
GBS is sensor group strep, group B strep.
Group B strep, which can be very harmful. So that your test, vaginal test, would detect that.
We can detect that too. And also, it's important to know that most people think that GBS comes from the vaginal microbiome. It may also come from the gut microbiome. So when you do the swab at a doctor's office using a PCR test, they actually swab the anal region and the vaginal region, vaginal first and then the anal region. So if you want to detect if you have GBS, you should do the gut and the vaginal microbiome tests concurrently. And this is also where testing earlier in conception or pregnancy is good, because if you have those GBS microbes, then you can take action earlier to kind of get rid of that before the actual doctor's PCR test usually at the 37 weeks. And that's the time when the doctor determines if you may need antibiotics during labor, because if you test positive for GBS at 37 weeks pregnant, most of the time your doctor will recommend antibiotic drips during labor, which you ideally don't want, so that you can reduce disruption to the infant gut. And things you can do to sort of reduce your risk for GBS. You can do it through dietary means, increasing your garlic and ginger intake. You can take a vaginal probiotic, and other measures. But then you also know that you want to work harder at reducing your risk for GBS.
That is so helpful. I have a family member that was tested about 37 weeks and was GBS positive, and I recommended these high doses of lactobacillus rhamnosus, and she was able to retest right before she delivered. It was still positive, unfortunately. So you're saying there just wasn't enough time, but even that message alone needs to get out. Moms need to know that.
Yes, it takes time. I mean, the vaginal community, if you think about taking a vaginal probiotic orally, right? It is a longer route to the vaginal canal. So you want to give it more time. Frankly, we've seen vaginal microbiomes turning around the quickest at 8 weeks. So it takes sometimes more than 8 weeks, maybe 4 months. So you want to test earlier to understand that and change that around if need.
That's good information. So you basically are recommending some form of lactobacillus probiotic then, if you're
Yes,
GBS
and
positive.
if you think about the vaginal microbiome science, we can go much deeper into that, and I try not to. So there's different states. CST1 and 2 are the lowest risk for any preterm labor or any vaginal conditions, and that's actually based on Lactobacillus crispatus, is type 1, and then Lactobacillus, I believe, gasseri is type 2. So most vaginal probiotics have what you said, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is clinically one of the most clinically backed strains, but we believe it's really due to the fact that we didn't have the sequencing technology until the recent 10 years. So technically, I would love to see more vaginal probiotics having the Lactobacillus crispatus strain, and some do. I think Yarrow has a specific product that has the crispatus and gasseri strains, because rhamnosus is not in any of the CST types. You could have them, and it may create an environment in the vaginal canal that's more acidic, where lactocrispatus or gasseri can colonize and stay, but it's not going to, rhamnosus is not going to colonize. So you kind of want to, if you want to course correct, I believe you should try to do a lactorhamnosus and crispatus strain to help it rebalance to the right state, so to
And
speak.
yeah, those strains are associated with lower or with better outcomes if you have GPS or not.
Yes, correct. Because again, think of it as the theater analogy. If you don't have lactobacillus in the vaginal canal, functions very similarly as bifidobacteria in an infant gut. If you have 100 seats, you want lactose strains to colonize the theater, right? And technically, crispatus or gasseri or genesee would be great to colonize. If you don't have those, then the BV bacterial vaginosis type bacteria, which is the Gardnerella vaginalis, is the technical name for it, will take hold and fill the seats out. And that is a CST4 state, has been associated with preterm labor and vaginal infections and STIs and many other vaginal yeast infection. Because then if lactobacillus is not protecting the vaginal canal, and it's not in a highly acidic state, because lactobacillus creates the acidic state in the vaginal canal, then things like yeast and candida can also take hold. And that includes streptococcus like GBS can also inhabit the vaginal canal and cause issues. So we want it to be as much as possible lactobacillus dominated, like up to 99.8% lactobacillus dominated.
So here's another example. Every OBGYN family doctor who's delivering babies needs to know exactly what you explained there.
Yes,
So absolutely.
100%.
100%. Yeah. And the more I learn about tiny health, the more excited I get. I've been doing a lot of research on the infant microbiome. My wife and I were blessed with two grandsons in 2023. So I really feel like I'm searching for an analogy to describe how I feel about tiny health and all that it's doing. And I came up with disruptive technology. And for our listeners, a disruptive technology is something like the internet, something that comes into technological realm that really disrupts and has the ability to drastically change the future of how consumers and how life is lived, et cetera. And I really feel like tiny health is a disruptive technology, but way more important than like an iPhone. The iPhone would be a disruptive technology. And I truly feel it's going to change the future of healthcare, whether it's just tiny health or other companies that come along, but this whole realm. So I'm wondering if you agree. Do you think it really will change the future of healthcare? And if gut testing grows exponentially, and we both hope that it really does, how scalable is tiny health?
Wow, I've never been compared to the advancement of the iPhone, but thank you. That's such an honor.
Better than the iPhone.
Yes. I mean, as it relates to human health, right? I think the iPhone is increasing our productivity or maybe decreasing, depending on how you use it.
Both.
But I think the infant gut, and again, the gut microbiome around the first 1,000 days is so crucial for lifelong health and immune system that absolutely I agree that this, I really hope this can be a routine screen in the future. And the kind of reason why I think it's so profound is because it could really prevent, and if not prevent, reverse chronic conditions for a lot of people, which unfortunately, kind of coming back to the stats, 1 in 2 children today have a chronic condition like eczema or asthma, and that's a lot. 1 in 2 kids have that, and that number is growing exponentially. So it is a societal problem. It increases healthcare costs and burden on our society and also on parents, right? If you think about the time we spend to take our kids to for treatment and the pain we go through, that our kids go through, and then the absenteeism from work to help them heal and all that. So I do hope that we can really change and improve the life and health span of our future generation, really. And if we grow exponentially, which we are, we're somewhat experiencing that in our first year and a half, we are very scalable because the way our sequencing works and sample processing in our lab is the more samples we receive, what happens is we batch the samples. The Illumina sequencer takes X number of samples, let's just say 1,000 for simplicity. So we batch that and then processes that. That's why it takes, industry standard 4 to 6 weeks, but we are at 2 to 3 weeks turnaround time right now. The more samples we get, the quicker the turnaround time. So in a way, us growing exponentially is beneficial to consumers because then our turnaround time can hopefully be at some point 1 to 2 weeks down to the turnaround time of a PCR test. And there's no reason that we can't scale quickly and vastly, because past the sequencing stage, it's all dry processing via our bioinformatics pipeline. Basically, it goes through our internal software to annotate the microbes, the DNA of the microbes to a name and a species and a relative abundance. And then everything else is run via our technology, our software, and automated. So it's very scalable.
Do you think the importance of what we're talking about, do you think gut testing could ever be covered by medical insurance?
Oh, that's a tough topic. I mean, eventually, I hope so, that the insurance companies and medical community sees value in our tests, which is why we're running our internal clinical studies to be able to publish and show that data of it reducing healthcare costs and improving health outcomes, which is what they ultimately care about, right? But the whole, I don't want to get into the whole medical industrial complex and that we have today in terms of how, for our testing to be covered by insurance, we have to, in a way, raise the prices of our tests because we don't know what insurance will cover and come back to the patient. And we cannot bill the patients for the balance that the insurance companies don't cover. So if you learn about, and as I'm learning now, about how insurance reimbursement works, is a mess, and it's a broken system, and it does not benefit us as a company or the consumer or the patient. It really doesn't. So I don't want to get into that, but basically it's very complex, and the kind of the rates will change, but as much as possible, I built this company again to be accessible to parents and affordable. So right now, it is in everyone's best interest that we keep our pricing as low as possible. We're barely breaking even to keep costs low so that everyone can afford testing and retesting at least twice a year.
Wonderful. Do you happen to know offhand if they qualify to be reimbursed under like a health savings account, HSAs?
Oh, yes. Great point. Yes. So right now you can use HSA and FSA as many of our customers do. You don't automatically get that by putting in your HSA, FSA credit card on our website because we're a newer company, but you can get a reimbursement. You can get a super bill if you write into hello@tinyhealth.com, just ask for a super bill and you will get that and get reimbursed for it.
Fantastic, which is almost like being covered in
It's
that
like,
sense.
yeah, 30-40% savings, right? In most cases.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm a member of the Gut Club Stool Test Discussion Group. It's a group on Facebook, and I know that you know the founder, Keith Bell, and quite familiar
Yes.
with this group.
Mhm.
And for our listeners to know, there are over 12,000 members, and many of those, and I've seen many discussions in this realm. Many of them are moms with babies and young children with some sort of gut health issues, and then, as you said, eczema, asthma, etc. What would you want to say to those moms?
Well, I kind of am in that group, but I'm not like really on Facebook very much. So I'm not hearing, I haven't been familiar with the conversations on it, but I believe um, Keith usually recommends a 16S test called Ombre, if I'm not mistaken, for its speed and also lower costs. But I would say for mom and baby specifically, for the reasons I mentioned earlier in our conversation, that you'd want to get down to the strain level. And when it comes to precise supplementation for mom and baby, you'd want to have precise information that's accurate and not, prone to false positives, which a 16S test like Ombre is more prone. It's cheap and it's great still to give you high level information for maybe if you're an adult and just wanting to learn more and get educated about what's in your gut. That could be a great route. But if you really want to use it for precise supplementation and really understanding down to the subspecies and strain level, I'd highly recommend a shotgun sequencing test, such as the ones we use at Tiny Health. And as it relates to infants and immune system development and chronic condition prevention, our test has those early biomarkers, predictive biomarkers for eczema and asthma to help you de-risk your child's risk for those conditions.
So, to use your prior analogies, it's the only way to know if Uncle Bob is sitting in the theater.
And if he's smiling or frowning.
If he's smiling or frowning. That's good too. That's like pathogenic yeah,
It's like what they're
probiotics.
doing, right? Because you may
Yeah.
have
Mm.
bifidobacteria that's not working. It may not be producing the functions you think it is, right? And then maybe you need extra support.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and for the record, my first Tiny Health test is probably being tested as we speak. I got notice that it arrived last week, so
Oh, great.
yeah, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
getting that result. I've long wondered if a microbiome testing company would able to offer a way to expedite a gut test for maybe an additional fee. A lot of parents, a lot of adults, anxious to get the test. And I'm confident, and I've talked to some parents who would be very happy to pay such a fee, especially for their infants and young children. And just wondering if you think that would ever be possible.
It's interesting that you asked that because last year, maybe the first half of last year, we did offer this ability to expedite processing for $100 extra. So our test is $199 and you pay 100 more. So parents are paying $299 to expedite their tests. And at a time, again, like coming back to the turnaround time, which we call TAT, it was 4 to 6 weeks. So you pay an extra 100 to reduce that to 2 to 3 weeks. 10% of our customer base paid for that. So I do know there's demand for that. But the good news is that we are already at 2 to 3 weeks for free with no additional charge because of the volumes we've been getting. So we've grown and expanded so quickly thanks to our customers and people who see value in our tests. And again, we're not limited to babies and children. Most adults, when they test our kids, they are so amazed by the data that they're getting. They test themselves too. So we do have a really robust and useful adult gut test. We have reduced our time to 2 to 3 weeks. Most of the time, you'll probably get your results around 3 to 4 weeks because once the lab results hit our software, internally we run through QC to check and all that. It takes another 3 business days to run that through. So just for some room, you should get your results between 3 to 4 weeks. In the future, we hope to reduce that time to from our lab to 1 to 2 weeks, and then so what that would mean is about 2 to 3 week turnaround time. So it is possible sometime this year when we reach that milestone.
Wonderful. And are those time frames lowering because you're doing larger batches, or has the technology improved that it's speeding them up, or some of both?
Yeah, both actually. So we did switch over to a newer sequencing machine. Again, the great thing about technology with the sequencing machines are like every year there's a new machine coming out that has more capacity. But what more capacity means is that you do need to batch more samples to process quicker, right? So you do need the volume. So when we have enough volume, we could switch to this new machine, and then you can process more samples quicker. But it's a factor of volume and also machines.
Yeah. So as you say, the more your company customer base grows, the better
Better.
experience everyone has. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's such a wonderful intersection there of free market business, but also benefiting the public, and that's really a sweet spot.
Yes.
So a little bit of a technical question: what is a bioinformatics pipeline, and what advantage does Tiny Health have over other testing companies?
So a bioinformatics pipeline basically is a way that our own software processes the raw data files that comes from the lab. Basically, the lab kicks back what we call a FASTQ file with the raw DNA sequences of the microbes. So these letters, that makes up a DNA sequence for each microbe. So then it's all kind of gibberish, right? If you get the FASTQ files and you don't have a pipeline, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So what we do, which is proprietary to Tiny Health, and we've patented the pipeline, is we then annotate that DNA sequence to a microbe, like this is E. coli strain D, or this is B. infantis EVC001 that maps back to the Avivo probiotic brand. Then we kind of spit it out into in a report format that tells you the reference range is it out of range or in range, and then what to do about it. Like the recommendations are all kind of like part of the post pipeline processing. And then we also have a lot of QC in place. If we get a gut test that is incorrectly coded by the user as a vaginal test and vice versa, or if you get a baby test, sometimes within a family, because the whole family tests, the parent may mix up their baby test with their own stool test, and we know immediately, and we ask the parent, did you swap your test accidentally? And the answer is often yes, because we can tell through our bioinformatics pipeline, our QC process, that we know what a 3-month-old gut looks like versus a 2-year-old versus a 50-year-old gut. So we know if samples were mixed up, and that's a huge advantage in terms of like knowing, kind of predicting your age, actually, something called the microbiome age that we would love to eventually publish and kind of push through our reports. But yeah, we have a lot of, sort of science, and the science is growing and changing almost every month. We're coming up with new insights. And the great thing about our reports is kind of like if you've ever done a 23andMe genetic test, you keep getting updates when new research comes out. So Tiny Health is very much like that, where our science team and R&D team is continuously kind of basically creating new biomarkers from research and improving our metrics. So our metrics are changing with more and more data from users, right? The population level, and knowing which is kind of a healthy state and a not so healthy state, we can kind of like refine those metrics as well.
My understanding is 16S is not always reliable at the species level. And just so everyone understands, Tiny Health identifies accurately the species level. It identifies accurately the subspecies level, as you mentioned, Bifidobacterium longum subspecies infantis, but also you have many that are down to the strain level, which is just amazing. But just a moment ago, you mentioned EVC001. I believe that's one that's not yet in your bioinformatics pipeline, but I'm told by your staff that's being updated. So can you explain how that process is coming along?
Yeah, so for 2024, that's the development on the Biomex pipeline that I'm most excited about. The strain level resolution is in the pipeline as we speak, and we're doing testing right now. We should be launching that strain resolution capacity in the next few weeks, if not the next month. We still have a lot of testing to do. What that means is that, probiotics is so kind of such a big part of the, what our community does, if needed. And so sometimes you kind of want to know, especially in an infant, if the probiotics you're giving your infant is colonizing in their gut. So it's the first time ever this technology is being made available to the public, to consumers like you yourself. You can see if your your baby, if you have one, or your niece and nephew, if you're giving them a probiotic, if the EVC001 from a vivo is actually colonizing, or is it coming from mom or dad, or is it coming from the environment? We have that capability. So we're starting our strain resolution launch with probiotics, and being able to detect if the probiotic came from which brand. The next level is we're going to do the toxicity of certain pathogens, like the E. coli I mentioned. There could be virulent strains of E. coli, there could be neutral strains. So we could discern what strains are beneficial or not. And then the next level of that is, the third phase is basically family sharing. So if we have basically microbiome samples from different family members, we can basically tell how much you share between family members and what specific strains. Even if you have a pet in the future, we could come up with a pet microbiome test and see, how many strains are your dogs and cats giving your child or yourself, and sharing with you.
I think I might be almost as excited about the update to the bioinformatics pipeline as you are. A couple infants I mentioned, both have had tiny health tests, and both show B infantis. And my best guess is, especially one of the infants had no detectable B longum before they went on the EVC001. So my guess is that both are a result of the EVC001. But again, as you mentioned, from a vivo, but we're not certain. So those parents are very eager to know that. And also, then when I saw the success of you say colonizing the gut, that's a key, right? You mentioned some like Lactobacillus rhamnosus can grow if you keep supplementing with probiotics, but don't colonize sustainably. Whereas EVC001 has been shown to do that. So as a result of that success and the result of my own bifido levels deteriorating significantly, I supplemented with EVC001. So that's why I'm so excited for that to be updated as well.
So you want to
So
see if EVC001 is in your gut, your adult gut.
correct.
Did you
Correct.
supplement with an HMO, like a prebiotic?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of HMO. I've been taking that for several years and seeing a lot of benefit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're basically mimicking the early days, right? The breastfeeding environment, and you're not getting any breast milk as an adult, a fully grown adult, but you can supplement with an HMO supplement that then enables your gut to then colonize these beneficial bacteria, bifidobacteria, that is increasingly reduced as you age. Kind of it's kind of a known thing that you do. There's a reduction in bifidobacteria as you age, as well as with antibiotic use in adult life or early.
exactly. And I've never really been a fan of probiotics per se. I never saw any difference in my gut. That was really before I was doing any testing. I
Mhm.
radically changed my gut just through prebiotics alone.
Mm.
Several different ones. And I finally added HMO, and I found that out of all the ones I tested, probably 6 total prebiotics, that HMO has had the biggest impact overall, including, and I think it was largely due to rise in bifido, uh, getting rid of most of my asthma symptoms. I had mild asthma, but so I've
Mhm.
seen great benefit from that. So
Yeah,
to be able to
amazing.
say it's EVC001,
The
that
only place where I would caution against too much prebiotic supplementation is like if you've had a round of antibiotics, which I hope you don't, then because prebiotics have been found to cross-feed pathogenic bacteria as well, like E. coli. So you want to be careful if you are sick to not over supplement on the HMOs.
yeah, no, that's good advice. And everybody, it's like the Goldilocks phenomenon, right? Everybody is a little different. And
Hmm.
I'd seen a study that I think it was Bacteroides fragilis, yes, that in vitro, so in the lab, B fragilis actually outconsumed HMOs versus B infantis, which I was shocked, really.
Hmm.
But of course, that's in the lab. And I think what happens with those two infants I mentioned in the actual infant gut, of course,
Hmm.
the bifido is rising, lactic acid is rising, and then that diminishes the capacity or the environment for B fragilis to grow. So that's completely different. Whereas I assume in the lab, they're growing B fragilis on its own with HMO, and they're growing B infantis on its own with HMO. But when you combine them, right, that's the key.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not familiar with that study, but basically Bacteroides are, which is, B fragilis is a type of Bacteroides. You see that mostly in infants through a vaginal birth. So C-section babies don't really have any or much Bacteroides under the solids. That's one of the signatures of a vaginal versus C-section birth. But then fragilis, B fragilis is one of those species that you don't want in too high amounts as the baby grows older, and certainly not in adults because it's more correlated with constipation. And I think you mentioned the BB536B longum strain. Basically, is the only strain that's right now clinically proven to somewhat reduce B fragilis. So that's kind of like interesting, which is kind of why we advocate for testing so that you know precisely what you need, what you're missing, what you may want to rebalance in your own gut.
Yeah, no, it's interesting about the BB536 or whatever that strain was. But
Mhm.
again, the EVC001, from what I can tell, just devastated the Bacteroides fragilis. So hopefully, it's more research, et cetera, will prove that.
Mhm.
Another sort of a technical question here, and this was a question from the Gut Club stool test discussion group on Facebook. And they
Mhm.
want to know, do you make reports available as a CSV with NCBI taxon numbers and percentile ranking?
So we can if you write in again at hello@tinyhealth.com and request for a CSV file, we can send it to you, and then we may even expose the relative abundance because right now we limit it to 0.05% relative abundance. So you may be able to see some of the lower abundance microbes, which again, the reason why we limit it to 0.05 is we're confident up to that level on the microbe. Beyond that, it's a higher false positive. So we don't show that until we improve our bioindex pipeline. But you can certainly see those if you request. We don't, our taxa names are based on GTDB, which is a slightly different database from NCBI. So we don't make those numbers available, but you can certainly Google the the microbe names and find the NCBI number yourself.
You said the lowest that you publish your reports is down to 0.05.
Yeah,
Yeah,
relative.
percent, right. Which makes sense. I mean, below that, it's sort of meaningless, and the impact on your gut, right?
It could be meaningless. Some practitioners believe they may have a kind of an impact if there's candida or H. pylori at very low abundances. So we're still kind of working through that. There's no real evidence pointing to that, but from a clinical perspective, that's what we're hearing. So we are interested in kind of like being able to eventually show microbes that are in very low abundance to, again, like I said earlier, contribute back to research and science to see if those low abundance, certain low abundance microbes are, kind of correlated with certain symptoms and conditions we're seeing.
Yeah, more excellent data points you gather. That's fantastic. Cheryl, I really appreciate the time you've given us and answering our questions. So helpful. I get more excited about what you're doing all the time. But I wonder, before I wrap things up here, is there anything else that you'd like to add that maybe we haven't covered today?
No, I think you have been very extensive and comprehensive in your questions. I really thank you for being so thoughtful in this interview. And I think the last thing I'll say is just like, we have a few new things coming up this year, apart from that screen tracking that we're launching soon. We have a membership program that's new, basically what we are calling a proactive care membership. That is an annual, like a test twice a year. Basically, we think everyone should do a gut test twice a year. It's at $3.99, but we do give out discounts occasionally. It comes with a consult call with a microbiome specialist to help you walk through your reports. And then we're coming up with a lot of different programs to help meet different needs. Like if someone's facing eczema, we have an eczema program. If you have chronic constipation or digestive issues as an adult, we have a program for that. We have a women's health program if you're pregnant or having vaginal issues. So kind of look out for that, because in the coming months, we will be launching a lot of new products.
Oh, fantastic. It just occurred to me, it might be fun in a year or two to interview you again and see the progress of Tiny Health because it's growing very fast, and that's great. So again, thank you, Cheryl, so much for your time, and I wish you and your company the best.
Thank you, Rich. It was fun.